The Panama Canal, stretching 77 kilometers, provides a crucial shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, eliminating the need for ships to sail around an entire continent. Recently, Donald Trump stated that he wants the United States to regain control of the canal, claiming that transit fees are excessively high. Is this just another one of Trump's typical provocations? Or is there some truth to his concerns? In this video, we'll break down what the Panama Canal really is, highlight key figures to assess its importance, analyze the power dynamics at play, and examine the challenges threatening its long-term viability, especially climate change. The idea of a canal across Panama dates back to the early 16th century, just a few decades after Europeans first arrived in the Americas. However, it wasn't until the mid-19th century that the first effective means of transporting goods across the Isthmus of Panama was introduced, the Panama Railway. The first serious attempt to construct a canal was led by the French under Ferdinand de Lesseps. The United States, highly interested in such a project, opposed the French effort, arguing that they should have a say in it due to the significant impact it would have on their trade. Even at that time, the US was already seeking to exert influence over a potential canal. The French project ultimately failed due to bankruptcy, providing the US with an opportunity to step in. However, Colombia, which controlled the Panama region at the time, resisted American intervention. Meanwhile, independence movements were growing in Panama, and the US supported them. In 1903, Panama declared its independence with US backing. Shortly after, the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty was signed, granting the US control over the canal project in exchange for a lump sum payment and an annual rent. The US secured perpetual rights over the future canal and an 8-kilometer wide zone on both sides of its route. Construction resumed, and the canal was completed in 1914. The treaty was widely condemned in Panama, leading to tensions. In January 1964, protests by Panamanian students escalated into clashes with US forces, resulting in 22 Panamanian and 4 American deaths. This unrest eventually led to the signing of new treaties in 1977, including the agreement to transfer control of the canal to Panama on December 31, 1999. Soon after Panama assumed control of the canal, discussions began on expansion. Unlike the Suez Canal, which is at sea level, the Panama Canal relies on a system of locks to accommodate changes in elevation. However, as merchant ships grew larger over the decades, the existing locks became too small in terms of length, width, and depth. To address this, construction of new locks began in 2009, and the expansion was completed in 2016, adding 2 new sets of 3 locks. A specific term defines the largest ship size that can transit the canal, Panamax. Before the expansion, a Panamax vessel could be up to 294 meters long, 32 meters wide, with a draft of 12.56 meters. After the expansion, the standard became Neo-Panamax, allowing ships up to 366 meters long, 49 meters wide, and with a draft of 15.2 meters. In 2019, around 14,000 ships passed through the canal, accounting for approximately 6% of global trade. Of these, 66% were either coming from or heading to the United States, while only 13% were linked to China, which ranked second. To give you an idea, in 2023, a little over 200 million tons of freight had the US at its origin or destination, compared to 64 million for China and 41 million for Japan. No other country exceeded 28 million tons. Also, in 2023, 32% of the cargo passing through the canal consisted of petroleum products, 22% was containerized goods, and 12.6% was grain, such as corn, wheat, and soybeans. I'm sharing these figures to give you a sense of the canal's traffic and to highlight that the vast majority of ships using it are involved in trade with the United States. So, what are Donald Trump's criticisms of Panama regarding this issue? There are mainly 2. He argues that transit fees are too high, and that Chinese investments in the region pose a commercial and strategic threat to the United States. First, it's important to clarify that the canal does not charge different rates based on a ship's country of origin. Tolls depend on factors like ship size, type, and cargo volume. For a Neo-Panamax vessel, tolls can reach several $100,000 per crossing. While this may seem high, these are standard fees for such infrastructure. Between 2023 and 2024, the Panama Canal Authority introduced an auction system for transit slots, which increased costs further. Initially a temporary measure, a long-term auction system was announced in mid-2024. From January 2025 to January 2026, 4 auction slots per day will be available. allowing ships to reserve their passage up to a year in advance. This could drive prices even higher, which may explain Trump's comments as an attempt to pressure Panama over its new pricing policies. These graphs also show that while the tonnage of goods passing through the canal remained relatively stable between 2019 and 2023, total revenue experienced significant growth. In 2023, canal operations contributed 4.5% to Panama's GDP. From the US perspective, there is concern over China's growing influence in the region. Over the past decade, China's been investing in Panama. One example is the 2016 takeover of Isla Margarita by the Chinese group Landbridge, which planned to develop a deep-water port. However, the project was ultimately abandoned in 2021 after it was revealed that the company had invested less money than expected and hired fewer local Panamanians than promised. Nevertheless, in 2017, Panama officially recognized the People's Republic of China, shifting its diplomatic stance from previously recognizing the Republic of China, Taiwan. Just a few months later, Panama also joined China's Belt and Road Initiative, initially focused on Eurasian and African cooperation, but later expanded to include Latin America. China's also secured contracts for the construction of a bridge over the canal, energy infrastructure along the canal, and a railway linking Panama City to Chiriquí Province. In 2021, a Hong Kong-based company renewed its contract as the operator of the Balboa and Cristobal ports on either side of the canal. This clearly signals a shift towards stronger Chinese involvement. Despite its presence, it's important to note that the canal remains under Panamanian management. It's operated by the Panama Canal Authority, a public entity. So why is China investing in Panama? This needs to be understood in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative. China aims to strengthen its trade routes, both to export its goods and to secure energy supplies. However, as we've seen, only 5 to 6% of the ships using the canal are linked to China. Still, this passage could become strategically important for China in specific scenarios. Today, more than a third of China's oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz, which provides access to oil from Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and partly the UAE. However, China's also working to diversify its supply sources to prepare for a potential blockade of Hormuz. Such a situation could arise in various scenarios, especially since the Strait of Hormuz lies between two major rivals, Saudi Arabia and Iran. In 2023, China made efforts to restore dialogue between these two countries, but it remains uncertain whether stability will be maintained in the medium and long term. As we've mentioned in other videos, China's expanding its energy partnerships, not only with Russia and Central Asian countries, but also in Latin America. Notably, 13.5% of China's oil supply comes from Colombia, Venezuela, and Brazil, with 94% of that originating from Colombia. Colombia has a Pacific coastline, which theoretically allows it to bypass the Panama Canal, but it currently has only one major port on that coast, Buenaventura, which is not connected to the country's oil and gas pipeline network. Instead, Colombia's largest oil export terminals are located on the Atlantic side, in Coveñas and Cartagena. Most pipelines from Colombia's central oil fields flow toward the Atlantic, except for one, which isn't connected to major fields and ends in Tumaco, a Pacific port lacking proper infrastructure. This is where the strategic importance of free navigation through the Panama Canal becomes clear for China, particularly for securing its oil supply. But for the United States, this could be seen as a threat. Just 25 years ago, they were the operators of the Panama Canal, and now they see what they consider their systemic rival, China, gaining influence in the region. That's a significant shift in the balance of power. So, as I briefly mentioned in the introduction, the viability of the Panama Canal has been questioned in recent years, particularly due to climate change. Because the Panama Canal operates with locks, there is indeed a need to manage water quantities with each ship passage. The locks release 200 to 250 million liters of fresh water into the ocean with each ship passage, or about 9 billion per day. The canal gets its water from two reservoir lakes, the huge Gatun Lake and the smaller Aljahuela Lake. But the problem is that with climate change, the dry season, which lasts from January to March, is becoming increasingly dry. Rainfall is lower, which leads to a lack of water, and therefore the level of the lakes drops. This has been the case in recent years. For example, between 2018 and 2020, and more recently in 2023 to 2024, the region also experienced the El Niño climate event, which worsened the situation. You could see here the rainfall between 2014 and 2023. 2023 was indeed the worst year, and it was during this period that the Panama Canal Authority implemented the auction system. This was because with less water, the canal could no longer allow as many ships to pass, so they allocated passages to the highest bidders. In fact, when there's less water, not only do you have to try to save it by reducing the number of ship passages, but also because the level's lower, the ships cannot be as loaded with goods as usual because they have to lower their draft so as not to touch the bottom. So not only do they transport less value, but they also potentially pay more for the passage. And to make matters worse, they can sometimes remain blocked for several weeks at the entrance to the canal while waiting for their passage. The queues can reach 150 ships. So, technically speaking, I find it interesting to point out that the locks put into service in 2016 are more modern and allow for the recycling of used water without releasing everything into the sea. 60% of the water is reused, but the old locks, on the other hand, release everything. It should also be noted that this problem during the dry season has been known for a long time. Back in the 1930s, a dam was built on the upper part of the Chagres River to release water during the dry season. But today, with climate change, this is no longer enough. Furthermore, the water in the region is not only used by the canal, but also as drinking water by the 2 million inhabitants of Panama City. You can see here the breakdown of the canal's water consumption in 2023. So there's also an issue of water sharing. To address these problems, technical solutions are being considered, and we can mention a few. Damming the Indio River with several dams to create a 45 square kilometer lake, then drilling a tunnel through the terrain to carry the water from this lake to Gaddon Lake, 8.4 kilometers away. 6 years of work are estimated to complete this project, at a cost of $2 billion and for a yield of 1.4 billion cubic meters of water. If I refer to the consumption distribution, we could see that this is roughly equivalent to what the locks consume, so it's quite good. Then the discharge of water from Lake Bayano into Lake Alhuela is also being considered. As you could see, we're no longer dealing with the same distances. This will require building a pipeline over 80 kilometers with pumping systems. So this is not the prioritized solution, but it is mentioned in case of really critical situations. Then there's the solution of desalination plants, mainly to provide drinking water to the population and thus reserve more water from the lakes for traffic in the canal. But this is an expensive and very energy-intensive solution. And finally, we can also mention geoengineering. That is, making it rain artificially, by seeding clouds with silver iodide. Tests have already been carried out at the end of 2023 by an American company. But this is a controversial technique. It raises questions about the need for its regulation. What are the ecological impacts if it's used in excess? In other cases, how to deal with it if a country systematically makes its clouds rain on its territory and as a result the neighboring country no longer has a drop of rain. In short, this is still a fairly unknown area. So, I hope that you now have a clearer understanding of the Panama Canal and the stakes it represents for the United States, but also for China. That's all for today. Thank you for watching this video. If you want to help me promote it on YouTube, leave a like or, even better, a comment to boost the algorithm. And don't forget to subscribe. This is the English version of a French channel about geopolitics, and many more videos are yet to come. See you in the next one.